Dead America. Survivor Stories. Frank. By Derek Slayton. Chapter 1. Smitty's Bar, Seattle Safe Zone, 9:18 p.m. Frank's massive hands dwarfed the tumbler of whiskey sitting in front of him. At 6'7", he made the bar stool beneath him look like something designed for a child, his broad shoulders stretching the fabric of his worn flannel shirt to its limits. The overhead lights caught the flecks of gray peppered throughout his close-cropped hair, signs of the wisdom that came with his 42 years. Despite his intimidating frame, one that had once terrorized quarterbacks across the league, his eyes carried a gentleness that put people at ease almost immediately. The bar around them was quiet tonight, just a handful of patrons seeking refuge from the new world outside. Rain pattered against the windows, creating a soothing backdrop to the stories being shared. "They called me the Mountain back when I played," Frank said with a soft chuckle that sent smile lines crinkling around his eyes. "Some sportscaster came up with it during my rookie season, and it stuck through 8 years in the pros. Still follows me everywhere." He took a contemplative look at the amber liquid in his glass. "People expect me to order something fancy, top shelf stuff, but I'll take the well whiskey with a splash of soda." Smitty nodded appreciatively, pouring another drink with a generous hand. The bartender had been collecting stories since the world went to hell, documenting the experiences of survivors. Frank was exactly the kind of person he was looking for, someone who'd seen day zero up close and lived to tell about it. "Most people are scared to talk about it," Frank said, taking a small sip of his drink. "But I figure sharing what we know might help somebody else make it through another day. That's worth more than silence." Frank's eyes drifted, focusing on something far beyond the wooden walls of the bar as his mind traveled back to where it all began. Day 0, Spokane, Washington. The morning started like any other. Frank guided his SUV into the strip mall parking lot, the suspension groaning slightly as it adjusted to his weight when he stepped out. Iron Fitness took up the corner unit, a gym he co-owned with Carlos, his former teammate and longtime friend. As he locked his vehicle, Frank noticed Patricia sitting in her car, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing frantically. A few spaces down, Dr. Milton was doing the same. Both were regular early birds at the gym, but neither seemed in a hurry to start their workouts today. The glass door jingled as Frank pushed it open, the familiar scent of disinfectant and sweat greeting him. Carlos was already there, wiping down equipment with a blue microfiber cloth, while Betsy stood behind the front desk, organizing the day's training schedule. "Morning, team," Frank called out, his deep voice resonating through the open space. Carlos looked up with a grin. "There he is. How was your date last night? Did you finally convince Sarah that binge-watching football documentaries counts as romance?" Frank laughed, shaking his head. "We compromised. She picked the restaurant, I picked the movie. And for your information, she actually enjoyed the 85 Bears." Said Ditka, reminded her of her grandfather. Betsy snorted. "That's either a very good sign or a very bad one." "How about you?" Frank asked, leaning against the counter. "How was that new fusion place you were excited about?" "Overpriced and underwhelming," Betsy sighed, tucking a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "They put pineapple in everything, and I mean everything. Even the breadsticks had pineapple baked into them." "That's a crime against carbohydrates," Carlos declared solemnly. The conversation flowed easily among them, a comfortable ritual that preceded each workday. Frank had built this place from the ground up with Carlos after his knee finally gave out in his 8th season. What had started as a post-career project had become a genuine community, a place where people connected beyond just the shared suffering of burpees and protein shakes. As they talked, the door chimed again, and Anna walked in, with Ryan close behind her. Anna, a pediatric nurse with perpetually tired eyes but an unwavering smile, had been coming to Iron Fitness for almost a year now. Ryan was newer, a software developer who'd decided at 35 that his sedentary lifestyle needed a serious course correction. "Morning, Betsy," Anna called out, tightening her ponytail as she approached. "Ready to make me hate life for an hour? Yesterday I could barely lift my coffee mug without wincing." Betsy grinned, abandoning her paperwork. "Always. Pain today means progress tomorrow. Besides, I saw you checking out those biceps in the mirror last week. Don't pretend you're not loving the results." Anna laughed, her cheeks flushing slightly. "Yeah, well, don't tell my patients I'm secretly vain. I've got a reputation as the nice nurse to maintain." "Your secret's safe with us," Carlos chimed in, looking up from his cleaning. Unlike Frank's protein shake recipes, did he ever tell you about the raw egg and pickle juice phase? "That was experimental," Frank protested, raising his hands defensively. "And it worked, didn't it?" "Sure," Carlos nodded solemnly. "If by worked, you mean it cleared the entire locker room in 30 seconds flat." Betsy rolled her eyes at the familiar banter. "All right, enough trip down disgusting memory lane. Anna, let's get you warmed up." Frank watched them head toward the free weight section, then turned his attention to Ryan, who was eyeing the row machine with determination. "Need a spot today?" Frank offered. Ryan nodded gratefully. "If you don't mind, I'm trying to add some weight this week." Frank followed him to the equipment, helping adjust the settings for Ryan's frame. The morning light streamed through the gym's front windows, casting long rectangles of brightness across the polished floor. "Remember," he said, carefully positioning Ryan's hands on the grips, "form matters more than weight. Better to do it right at 150 than wrong at 200. Your body doesn't know the number, it just knows the resistance." "Easy for the mountain to say," Ryan joked, settling into position. "I've seen the old highlight reels online. Didn't you once tackle a running back so hard his helmet ended up in the 3rd row?" Frank chuckled, shaking his head. "Media exaggeration. It only made it to the 2nd row." He adjusted Ryan's foot placement slightly. "But seriously, that was a different lifetime. These days I'm more interested in helping people build strength that lasts, not the kind that breaks bodies." "Philosophical and strong," Ryan quipped. "No wonder this place is always packed. You should put that on a t-shirt." Frank was about to respond with a comeback about Ryan's own gym fashion choices, today featuring a faded shirt with Control-Alt-Delete yourself emblazoned across it, when the door chimed again. He glanced up out of habit, a greeting ready on his lips, but the words died in his throat. 2 people stood in the doorway. At least, they had once been people. Their skin had a grayish pallor, with dark veins visible beneath like roads on a decaying map. One, a woman in what remained of a business suit, her blonde hair matted with something dark and viscous, was missing half an ear, the wound not bleeding but darkened like spoiled meat. The other, a man in hospital scrubs with an ID badge still clipped to his pocket, had what looked like a bite mark on his forearm, the flesh around it mottled and discolored, with streaks of black reaching up toward his elbow. Both had eyes that seemed clouded over, unfocused yet somehow alert, the milky bluish yak of cataracts, but with an unsettling awareness behind them. Their clothes were disheveled, stained with substances Frank didn't want to identify, and there was an unnatural stiffness to their posture, as if their bodies had forgotten the casual grace of being alive. The woman's head twitched sporadically, a jerky movement that reminded Frank of a bird of prey spotting movement in the grass. The man's mouth hung slightly open, revealing teeth stained with what could only be blood. For a moment, everyone in the gym froze, the scene suspended in disbelief. The pop music continued to play cheerfully through the speakers, some upbeat song about dancing all night that now seemed obscene in its happiness. A barbell somewhere in the back of the gym rolled off a rack, the metallic clang breaking the silence like a starting pistol. Then the 2 figures moved with a primal burst of speed that defied their apparent condition. The woman let out a guttural, animalistic shriek that raised goosebumps along Frank's arms. The man in scrubs made no sound at all, somehow more terrifying in his silent pursuit. They charged straight toward Anna and Betsy, mouths open in silent hunger, hands outstretched with fingers curled like claws. "What the hell?" Ryan began, rising from the machine. Frank was already moving, years of linebacker training kicking in without conscious thought. His body knew how to cross space quickly, how to intercept a target, how to apply force where it would do the most good. "Get back," he bellowed to the others as he grabbed a 25-pound plate from the weight tree. "Carlos, weapons!" The first creature reached for Anna, fingers clawing at her arm. Frank swung the weight plate in a wide arc, connecting with the creature's shoulder and sending it staggering sideways. It should have gone down. A hit like that would have dislocated a normal person's shoulder, possibly shattered their clavicle. Instead, the thing simply redirected, turning its attention to Frank with a guttural noise that raised the hair on his neck. The zombie lunged at him, and he brought the weight plate up in a brutal uppercut, connecting with the underside of its jaw. There was a sickening crack, and the zombie's head snapped back, but still it came, even with its jaw hanging at an unnatural angle. "Shit," Frank muttered, backpedaling to create space. Ryan had recovered from his initial shock and now grabbed a dumbbell, rushing to Frank's aid. Together, they forced the creature back toward the wall, Frank blocking its attempts to grab them while Ryan looked for an opening. "Now!" Frank shouted, pinning the zombie against the mirrored wall with his forearm across its throat. Ryan swung the dumbbell with all his strength, connecting squarely with the zombie's temple. There was a wet, crushing sound, and the creature went limp, sliding down the now cracked mirror to the floor, dark fluid leaking from its ruined skull. Across the room, Carlos was struggling, the barbell he wielded doing a good job of keeping the second zombie at arm's length, but not doing any real damage. "The head," Frank called out, already moving to help. "You have to crack it in the head." Carlos adjusted his grip and swung the barbell like a baseball bat, connecting with the side of the zombie's head. The impact knocked the creature off balance, but didn't stop it. Frank reached them in 3 long strides, the weight plate still clutched in his hands. With a grunt of effort, he brought it down on the zombie's head like a massive stone hammer. The creature collapsed instantly, its skull partially caved in. Frank struck it once more to be certain, then stepped back, breathing heavily. For several long seconds, no one spoke. The only sounds were their ragged breathing and the cheerful pop music still playing through the gym's speakers, a surreal counterpoint to the violence that had just unfolded. "What?" Ryan finally stammered. "What were those things?" "No clue," Carlos said quietly, leaning on the barbell for support. "But I don't like them." Frank stared at the bodies on the floor, part of him still expecting them to get up, despite the catastrophic head trauma they'd sustained. "We need to call 911, Betsy said, reaching for her phone with shaking hands. The group stood by silently, watching the young woman dialing the phone. Before she could bring the device to her ears, a high-pitched, unnatural sound poured out of the speaker. "What in the hell is that?" Ryan asked. Before anybody could answer, their attention was drawn to the front of the gym as the doorbell chimed once again, 3 more creatures pushing their way inside. Frank's eyes went wide at the sight. "Oh my God." Chapter 2. The 3 zombies advanced in unison, their movements jerky but purposeful. Frank's mind raced, calculating angles and distances, a skill ingrained from years on the football field. The gym layout, designed to maximize space for equipment, now created deadly funnels and blind spots. Without missing a beat, Frank sprinted toward the far corner of the gym, deliberately knocking over a rack of medicine balls. The noise worked. 2 of the zombies immediately changed course to follow him. "Come on," Frank shouted, pounding his chest with one hand while keeping the weight plate raised in the other. "Over here." The last remaining zombie remained focused on the others, lurching toward Carlos, Betsy, Anna, and Ryan, who had backed themselves toward the water fountains. Carlos managed to arm himself with another barbell, but the confined space would make it difficult to swing effectively. Frank reached the squat rack and positioned himself between it and the wall. The first creature reached him, moving with terrible speed despite her mangled ankle. As she lunged, Frank sidestepped and used her momentum against her, driving her head first into the metal upright of the exercise equipment. The impact would have knocked out a living person, but she simply reoriented, blood now trickling from a gash on her forehead, and came at him again. This time Frank was ready. He swung the weight plate in a tight arc, connecting with the side of her head. The force of the blow sent her sprawling onto the rubber floor mats, her body twitching as blood pooled beneath her shattered skull. "One down," Frank muttered, turning to face the other ghoul that had followed more slowly. The man's cardigan hung off one shoulder, revealing a deep bite wound that had torn away most of his collarbone. His jaw worked silently as he approached, stiff arms outstretched. Frank backed up, looking for leverage. His heel bumped against a loaded barbell on the ground, someone's abandoned deadlift setup. He stepped left, drawing the zombie forward, then dodged right at the last second. The creature stumbled past him, and Frank seized his opportunity. With a grunt, he heaved the barbell up and drove it down across the zombie's back, pinning it to the ground. The weights on either end prevented it from being pushed up easily, and the creature flailed uselessly beneath the bar, unable to gain the leverage to free itself. Across the gym, Carlos was keeping the attacking zombie at bay with desperate swings of his barbell. Betsy had positioned herself in front of Anna, a pair of resistance bands stretched between her hands like makeshift restraints. Ryan stood off to the side, clutching a dumbbell but clearly too terrified to engage. The zombie lunged at Carlos, who swung the barbell but missed, throwing himself off balance. The creature seized its chance, closing the distance and grabbing at his arm with blood-soaked fingernails. "Carlos!" Frank shouted, already sprinting toward them. Frank veered toward a rowing machine that was right behind the confrontation. He grabbed the handle with both hands, yanking the weights up with all his strength, pulling the cable taut. "Shove it!" he yelled to Carlos, who drove the creature backwards with everything he could muster. The zombie stumbled back, falling onto the bench, its head landing underneath the weights. Frank smirked as he released the cable, sending the weight stack crashing down. The metal plates slammed into the creature's face, obliterating the ghoul. There was a sickening crunch as its skull compressed between the two metal surfaces. The gym fell silent except for their ragged breathing and the cheerful pop music still playing through the speakers. "Is everyone okay?" Frank asked, scanning his friends for injuries. They nodded mutely, shock evident on their faces. "Carlos," Frank said, his voice dropping into the commanding tone he'd used as a team captain, "I need you to get to the front door and secure it." Carlos nodded. "On it." "The rest of you follow me," Frank instructed. "We've got one more to deal with." They followed him back to where the zombie remained pinned beneath the barbell, still struggling to free itself. Its fingers clawed at the rubber mat, tearing strips away as it tried to pull itself forward. "What is this?" Anna whispered, staring at the creature with bewilderment. "Some kind of infection? Rabies? Bath salts?" "I've never seen rabies do this," Betsy said, keeping a safe distance. "And look at the bite marks. They're not bleeding." The zombie's clouded eyes found them, and it redoubled its efforts to free itself, emitting a guttural sound that raised the hair on Frank's neck. "Whatever it is," Frank said, lifting a 45-pound plate from a nearby rack, "I don't think they can come back from it." He approached the pinned creature, plate held high. The others looked away as he brought it down with decisive force. The sound was mercifully brief, and then the struggling stopped. For a long moment, no one spoke. The reality of what they'd done, what they'd had to do, weighed heavily in the air between them. Finally, Carlos called from the front of the gym, "Guys, you need to see this." They made their way to the entrance, where Carlos had clicked the deadbolts shut, securing the doors. He stood to one side, peering through the window, his face grim. "Patricia and Dr. Milton," he said, pointing to the parking lot. "They're trapped inside one of their cars." Frank looked where Carlos indicated, spotting the two workout enthusiasts huddled together in the back seat of the sedan. "Why aren't they driving off?" Ryan asked. "Look at the ground a few yards away from the car," Carlos said, pointing to a workout bag laying on the pavement. "Their keys must be in there." "We can't just leave them out there," Betsy said, her voice cracking. Frank nodded, making a quick count. 4 zombies in total, all of them surrounding the vehicle. Bad odds, but not impossible. "We have to move fast," he said. "The noise will attract more of them." "Are you insane?" Ryan blurted, backing away. "We barely survived in here and now you want to go out there?" Frank turned to him, measuring his words carefully. "Those people need help. We have weapons, we know how to stop these things, and we have surprise on our side. This is our best chance." Ryan shook his head vehemently. "No way. There's no way in hell, man. I'm staying right here." Frank took a step toward him, drawing himself up to his full height, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "I will drag you out there myself if I have to. Me, you, and Carlos against 4 of them. They won't know what hit them, but only if we move now before more of them show up." The younger man stared up at him, conflict evident in his eyes. Fear battled against shame, against the knowledge that Frank was right. Finally, he swallowed hard and nodded. "What do we need?" he asked, his voice barely steady. "Weapons," Frank replied, "something with reach." He scanned the gym, mentally cataloging their options. Ryan, take the baseball bat from the lost and found. Carlos, keep that barbell. Betsy, stay here with Anna. Keep the doors barricaded after we leave. Frank himself selected a pair of 10-pound dumbbells, one for each hand, heavy enough to do damage, light enough to swing quickly. He tested their weight, muscle memory from countless workouts making them feel like natural extensions of his arms. Ready? He asked, looking at Ryan and Carlos. They nodded, though fear was plain on their faces. Frank couldn't blame them. His own heart was hammering against his ribs, but there was no time for second thoughts. Let's do it. Carlos pulled aside the makeshift barricade, and they burst out into the parking lot, weapons raised, their footsteps on the pavement drawing the attention of the ghouls just up ahead. Two zombies immediately turned from Patricia's car, sensing fresh prey. Frank charged forward, swinging the dumbbell in his right hand like a club. It connected with the first zombie's temple, dropping it instantly. Beside him, Ryan hesitated for just a moment before finding his courage, bringing the baseball bat down on the second zombie's skull with a crack that echoed across the asphalt. On the other side of the car, Carlos moved with surprising agility for a man his size, the barbell a blur as he took down one of the zombies that rushed towards him. The fourth creature closed the distance quickly, but Frank was already there, both dumbbells swinging in lethal arcs. The zombie collapsed, its head a ruined mess. "Patricia, Dr. Milton," Frank shouted, gesturing urgently toward the gym. "Inside, now." The two need no second urging. Patricia stumbled from her car, clutching her purse as if it offered some protection. Dr. Milton finally got his door open, his normally immaculate appearance disheveled. "What's happening?" the doctor gasped as they hustled toward the gym entrance. "Inside first, questions later," Frank insisted, scanning the surrounding area for more threats. The strip mall parking lot remained mostly empty, but in the distance he could hear car alarms and faint screams. Whatever this was, it wasn't isolated to their location. They were halfway back to the gym entrance when the sound of screeching tires drew their attention to the main road. A blue sedan was careening wildly along the street bordering the strip mall, pursued by half a dozen running figures. The driver seemed to be losing control, the car fishtailing as it approached the turn into the parking lot. "Get inside!" Frank shouted to the others, already sensing what was about to happen. The sedan hit the curb at speed, went briefly airborne, and then slammed back down onto the asphalt of the parking lot. The driver overcorrected, sending the vehicle into a sideways slide. Time seemed to slow as Frank watched the car's momentum carry it into a roll, once, twice, before it came to rest on its roof with the sickening crunch of metal and breaking glass. The pursuing figures didn't slow down. They scrambled over the curb, their attention fixed on the overturned vehicle and whoever might be trapped inside. "Oh God," Ryan whispered beside him. "There's someone alive in there." Frank watched as a bloodied hand pressed against the driver's side window, followed by a woman's face, her eyes wide with terror as the creatures closed in on her upended car. Chapter 3. "Go," Frank shouted to Carlos, who stood frozen at the sight of the overturned vehicle. "Get everyone inside the gym. Lock it down." Carlos hesitated only a moment before nodding, herding Patricia and Dr. Milton toward the gym entrance where Betsy and Anna were already holding the door open. Ryan lingered, baseball bat still clutched in his white-knuckled grip. "Ryan, go with them," Frank ordered, already breaking into a sprint toward the flipped car. "But I go now." The authority in Frank's voice finally got through to the younger man, who turned and ran after the others. Frank didn't watch them go. His focus narrowed to the overturned sedan and the half-dozen infected that were closing in on it, drawn by the noise and movement. The distance between the gym and the car felt endless. Frank pumped his legs harder, his breath coming in controlled bursts just like during his playing days. The dumbbells weighed down his hands, but he kept his grip tight. He'd need them. "Hey!" he bellowed as he ran, his deep voice carrying across the parking lot. "Over here!" Two of the infected turned at the sound, their eyes fixing on the new target. They immediately changed course, lurching toward him with that unnatural speed that still sent chills down his spine. The other four remained focused on the car where the woman's bloodied hand was now frantically trying to push against the crumpled driver's side door. The first zombie reached Frank faster than he'd anticipated. A young man in a school uniform, his throat torn open in a ragged wound that should have killed him instantly. Frank didn't break stride. As the creature lunged, he swung the dumbbell in his right hand in a tight arc, connecting with the creature's forehead. The impact sent it sprawling across the asphalt. Its skull caved in. The second zombie came at him from a few steps behind the first. Frank lowered his shoulder in a move that had sent countless running backs to the turf and plowed into her with the full force of his momentum. The zombie went down hard, and Frank pivoted, bringing his foot down with crushing force on its head. The sound was sickening, but there was no time to dwell on it. 5 yards from the car, Frank skidded to a halt. The 4 remaining zombies were clawing at the windows, pounding against the glass, which had already begun to spiderweb with cracks. The woman inside was screaming now, a sound that cut through him like a physical pain. Frank dropped to one knee, deliberately slamming one of the dumbbells against the pavement. The metallic clang rang out like a dinner bell. "Come on, you bastards," he shouted. "Fresh meat right here." The nearest zombie turned, a heavy-set man in what had once been an expensive suit. His face was a ruin, one cheek torn away to reveal teeth and gum line in a perpetual, grotesque grin. Behind him, the others began to notice the new prey as well, their heads swiveling with hunger in their eyes. Frank rose to his feet as the first one charged. He sidestepped, swinging both dumbbells in a devastating cross-strike that caught the zombie on either side of its head. The creature dropped instantly, skidding along the pavement. The next 2 came together, a woman and teenage boy running shoulder to shoulder. Frank took a step back, creating space, then exploded forward. The dumbbell in his left hand caught the woman under the chin, snapping her head back with enough force that something in her neck gave way with an audible crack. The boy got closer, fingers clawing at Frank's arm before he could bring the second dumbbell around in a backhanded swing that connected with the zombie's temple. The fourth reached out as Frank spun around, feeling the creature's fingers grabbing at his shirt. He spun, driving his elbow back in a reflexive move, creating just enough separation to bring one of the dumbbells down in an overhead strike. The zombie collapsed in a heap. Frank stood breathing heavily, surrounded by the bodies of the fallen creatures. In the distance, the sound of another crash drew his attention. At the main intersection just beyond the strip mall, 2 cars had collided. Even from this distance, he could see figures swarming toward the wreckage, dozens of them, far more than he could handle alone. Some of the infected at the edge of that group had already noticed him, breaking away from the main pack and shambling in his direction. He had minutes, maybe less. Frank dropped one of the dumbbells and rushed to the overturned car. The driver's side window was completely shattered now, but the door was crushed inward, leaving only a narrow opening. Through it, he could see the woman still strapped in by her seatbelt, hanging upside down. Blood ran from a gash on her forehead, and her right leg was bent at an unnatural angle. "Hold on," Frank called to her, gripping the edge of the door frame. "I'm going to get you out." Her eyes, wide with fear and pain, fixed on him. "Hurry," she gasped. "Please." Frank planted his feet and pulled with all his strength. The door groaned but refused to yield. He repositioned, got a better grip, and tried again. This time he felt movement, just an inch, but it was something. One more heave, muscles straining, and the door tore free with a shriek of protesting metal. "Can you reach the seatbelt release?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder at the approaching infected. They were maybe 50 yards away now, moving with that relentless, single-minded purpose. The woman fumbled for the clasp, her movements clumsy from pain and fear. With a button press, she fell awkwardly, crying out as her injured leg hit the roof of the car, now the floor of their makeshift arena. "I've got you," Frank assured her, gently helping her extract herself from the wreckage. As soon as she tried to put weight on her right leg, she nearly collapsed. "I can't walk," she gasped through gritted teeth. Without hesitation, Frank scooped her up, one arm under her knees, the other supporting her back. She was light in his arms, but carrying her, he wasn't sure he could outrun the approaching horde. A quick glance back toward the gym showed it was too far, and the creatures would catch them well before they could reach it. "Hang on tight," he told her, adjusting his grip to free one hand for the dumbbell. If they couldn't outrun them, he'd have to fight through. "Hey, over here." The shout came from his left. Frank turned to see a man waving frantically from the doorway of the coffee shop at the corner of the strip mall. "In here! Hurry!" It was a lot closer than the gym, and Frank didn't hesitate. Clutching the woman tightly to his chest, he sprinted toward the coffee shop, the dumbbell still gripped in his right hand. Behind them, the zombies broke into that unnatural, terrifyingly fast run, closing the distance with each passing second. The man at the door, young, with thick glasses and a barista's apron, held it open as Frank barreled through with his injured passenger. The door slammed shut behind them, the lock clicking just as the first of the infected slammed against the glass. Inside, 4 other people stared at them with wide, frightened eyes. 2 women in business attire, a balding middle-aged man, and another barista, this one a young woman with a sleeve of colorful tattoos. "Thank you," Frank panted, gently setting the injured woman down on one of the couches near the window. "I'm Frank, this is—" He realized he didn't know her name. "Mia," the woman supplied, her face pale with pain. "And thank you, I thought—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. The thumping against the door intensified as more ghouls joined the first. The glass door shuddered in its frame with each impact. Hairline cracks beginning to form at the edges. "That's not going to hold," the male barista said, pushing his glasses up nervously. "There's too many of them." Frank moved to the door, pressing his considerable weight against it as the next wave of infected slammed into it. The frame creaked ominously, one of the hinges already starting to pull free from the wall. "Everyone, against the door, now," he commanded. The others rushed to comply, all except Mia, who couldn't stand, and the female barista, who appeared frozen in place. "Is there another way out?" Frank asked as they braced the door against the increasing pressure from outside. Through the cracking glass, he could see more creatures gathering, drawn by the noise and the sight of prey so tantalizingly close. The female barista finally found her voice. "The back door leads to the alley, but—" "But what?" Frank prompted, feeling the door jump beneath his palms as a particularly forceful impact hit it. She shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. "There's a delivery truck for the Italian place next door. It's blocking our exit. We tried already." Frank muttered a curse under his breath. The front of the coffee shop was all glass, large windows that would shatter as easily as the door once the infected got through. They'd be trapped with nowhere to run. His eyes scanned the interior frantically, looking for anything they could use. His gaze stopped on the wall that separated the coffee shop from the adjacent restaurant, specifically on a sizable dent in the drywall, with small cracks radiating outward from the center. The female barista followed his look. "Yeah, a customer got in a fight last night, punched the wall before we could kick him out." Frank moved toward it, examining the damage more closely. The drywall was cheap, the kind of lightweight construction used in most strip malls. Frank's mind began to race. If the customer had managed to dent it with just a fist— A louder crack from the door pulled his attention back. One of the hinges had partially torn free from the frame, the door now hanging at a slight angle. The glass had a web of cracks spreading across it, ready to give way at any moment. Frank leapt into action, yanking a table out of the way to clear a path to the damaged section of the wall. He hefted the dumbbell, testing its weight one last time. "What are you doing?" the middle-aged man asked, still braced against the failing door. Frank didn't bother to explain. Instead, he brought the dumbbell back and drove it into the center of the dent with all his strength. The drywall crumbled inward, leaving a hole the size of a softball. He struck again, widening it, plaster dust billowing around him. "Keep that door closed as long as you can," he shouted over his shoulder, hammering at the wall. After several more strikes, he had opened a ragged hole large enough to fit a person. Frank listened carefully for any signs of threats on the other side. Hearing none, he broke away more drywall until the opening was large enough for even his massive frame. Sticking his head through, he found himself looking into the darkened dining room of the Italian restaurant. Tables and chairs sat empty, waiting for a lunch service that would never come. "We have a way out," he called back to the others. "Move, now." The female barista was the first to react, rushing to help Mia up from the couch. Together, they maneuvered the injured woman toward the hole in the wall. "You first," Frank told her, helping guide her through the opening. Mia followed, then the 2 businesswomen, each casting terrified glances back at the door that was now visibly bending inward. "Come on," Frank urged the remaining 2 men. The middle-aged man abandoned his position at the door, scrambling toward the escape route. As soon as he let go, the increased pressure from the infected caused the door to bow further inward, glass splintering. "It's giving way," the male barista cried, still desperately pressing against it. "Leave it," Frank shouted. "Move your ass." The young man hesitated for just a moment more, then made a decision. He pushed off from the door and sprinted toward the hall, diving through headfirst just as the glass finally shattered behind him. The doorframe itself gave way a second later, infected pouring through the opening like a flood breaching a dam. Frank was already halfway through the hole when the first zombie reached for him, fingers grazing his ankle. He kicked back instinctively, connecting with something solid, and then pulled himself fully through to the other side, landing hard on the restaurant's tile floor. The infected began pressing against the hole immediately, arms reaching through, faces contorted in mindless hunger visible in the gap. The opening was too small for them to pass through quickly, their bodies jamming together as they tried to force their way in. Chapter 4. Frank pulled himself off the floor with the help of the male barista. "Are you all right, man?" the young barista asked as Frank gathered himself. Before he could get too comfortable, however, both men jumped back instinctively as grayish fingers clawed through the opening, followed by the snarling face of a zombie trying to force its misshapen head through the gap. Without hesitation, Frank brought the dumbbell down hard on the creature's skull. The wet crunch of impact was followed by the body going limp, effectively plugging the hole for the moment. With the sound from the zombies subsiding, the void was quickly filled by the voices of the panicked survivors. The restaurant's dining room erupted in a confusing mess of sounds, everyone talking at once. "What are those things? We're trapped. They're going to get through. My kids are at home. Is this happening everywhere?" The volume rose with each passing second, fear feeding on fear. Frank put 2 fingers to his lips and let out a piercing whistle that cut through the chaos like a knife. The room fell suddenly silent, all eyes turning to him. "Everybody calm down," he said, his deep voice steady and measured. "Panic gets us nowhere. We're going to be okay, but I need you all thinking clearly. First things first. I need a phone." One of the businesswomen fumbled in her purse and produced a smartphone. "Here," she said, hand trembling slightly as she passed it over. Frank took it with a grateful nod and dialed the gym's number from memory. Each ring seemed to stretch into eternity before Carlos's voice came through, breathless and anxious. "Iron Fitness, this is Carlos." "Carlos, it's Frank." "Frank. Jesus, man, we thought the worst." "Wait, where the hell are you?" "Italian restaurant at the end of the strip. I've a handful of people with me, one injured. Everyone okay on your end?" "Yeah, we're all here. Ryan's actually being useful for a change, helped us barricade the front. Everybody's holding it together, so what's your situation looking like?" Frank glanced at the hole in the wall, where the dead zombie's body was being slowly pushed aside by the relentless pressure of others trying to get through. "We're good for the moment, but this place isn't a long-term solution. We need to get back to the gym, but I'm not sure we can open our back door because of the delivery truck." "Hold on, I'll go check it for you." Frank heard muffled voices as Carlos relayed the situation to the others, then the sound of a door opening. The seconds ticked by, each one precious. "Frank, there's movement at the far end of the alley, past the delivery truck. Can't tell how many, but it's not clear." Frank weighed their options. The hole in the wall wouldn't hold much longer. The front of the restaurant was a death trap. The alley was their only shot. "We're going to make a run for it," he decided. "Be ready for a fight. We might have company." Carlos's voice dropped slightly. "You think you can handle it? Those things are relentless." Frank watched as the dead zombie's body shifted another inch, a new set of fingers appearing at the edge of the hole. "I'm not sure. Depends how many there are. Let me know when you're moving. I'll come up and help. Ryan too, maybe." "Will do. Get ready because it's not going to be in the next few minutes." Frank ended the call and turned to the group, all of whom were watching him with expressions ranging from terror to desperate hope. "Listen up," he said, moving toward the kitchen area. "We need to gather up as much food as we can carry. My gym at the other end of this strip mall, that's our destination. It's defensible, has water, and there are people waiting for us, but we need to move fast." The group moved quickly, and within minutes they had assembled an impressive haul of dried pasta, sauce, and other non-perishables. The restaurant's canvas tote bags emblazoned with its logo served to carry it all. Mia sat propped against a refrigerator, her injured leg stretched out before her, face pale but determined. The two businesswomen positioned themselves on either side of her, ready to support her weight for the dash to safety. Frank checked the back door, peering through its small window at the alley beyond. The delivery truck blocked most of his view, but he could see movement in the shadows at the far end. He pulled out the phone and called Carlos again. "We're moving now. Come up the alley as far as you can." "On our way." Frank turned to the group, his expression grave but confident. "Stay together. Move as quickly and quietly as possible. The infected are drawn to noise, so if something happens, don't scream, run." "Is everybody ready?" Everyone nodded back at him, fear evident but controlled now, replaced by the focus that comes when survival depends on following a plan. Frank eased the door open, stepping out first with the dumbbell raised. The alley was narrow, dumpsters lining one side, the bare brick wall of the adjacent building on the other. The delivery truck sat about 15 yards down, its back doors open, boxes scattered on the ground beneath it. He motioned the others forward, the survivors moving as quietly as they could down the alley. They made it perhaps 10 yards when a scraping sound came from beyond the truck. A lone zombie, once a delivery driver judging by the uniform, came around the corner. Its head snapped toward them, nostrils flaring as if catching their scent on the air. It let out a guttural moan and charged. "Keep moving," Frank ordered the others, positioning himself between them and the oncoming threat. The zombie ran straight for the most vulnerable targets, Mia and the women helping her. Frank intercepted it with practiced precision, grabbing it by the side of the neck and driving it hard into the brick wall. The back of its skull connected with the unforgiving surface with a crack, but the creature continued to struggle. Frank brought the dumbbell around forcefully, finishing the job with a blow that collapsed the side of its head. The noise, however, had done its damage. From beyond the truck came the sounds of more creatures. The shuffling of feet, the low moans transforming into excited growls as they sensed prey. Frank caught sight of movement, 5 figures rounding the truck, then more behind them. "Run!" he shouted to the others, who were already moving as fast as Mia's injury would allow. Frank took up a position between his group and the approaching infected, knocking the first one down with a sweeping leg strike that Carlos had taught him during their brief exploration of MMA fighting. He didn't bother trying for killing blows, there were too many. Instead, he focused on creating obstacles, dropping the ghouls to the ground to slow the others behind them. The dumbbell became an extension of his arm, swinging in controlled arcs that connected with shoulders, knees, whatever would disable the fastest. A teenage girl in blood-soaked pajamas went down with a shattered kneecap. A businessman, missing half his face, stumbled over her, giving Frank time to sidestep the next attack. "Frank!" Carlos's voice cut through the din of the struggle. Frank looked up to see his friend barreling down the alley toward him, barbell held like a battering ram. Behind him, surprisingly, was Ryan, wielding the baseball bat with more confidence than Frank would have given him credit for. Carlos slammed into the approaching horde, the barbell sweeping 2 infected off their feet. Ryan hung back slightly, but still managed to land a solid hit on a zombie that tried to flank them. "The others?" Frank called out, dropping another infected with a blow to the sternum. "Already inside," Carlos confirmed, swinging the barbell in a wide arc that created momentary space. "Let's go!" They began a fighting retreat, backing down the alley while holding the zombies at bay. It wasn't about killing them now, it was about buying enough time to reach safety. Frank knocked another zombie to the ground, then another. Carlos and Ryan did the same, creating a carpet of writhing bodies that the ones behind had to navigate. "Now!" Frank shouted, and the 3 men broke into a final sprint. They crossed the last few yards with creatures right on their heels, diving through the doorway in a tangle of limbs. Betsy slammed the door shut, and Patricia, face still ashen with fear but movements precise, slid the heavy metal security bar into place. For a moment, the only sound was their heaving breaths as they lay sprawled on the floor of the gym's back hallway. Then Carlos began to laugh, a slightly hysterical, relieved sound that somehow broke the tension. Ryan joined in, then Frank, the laughter becoming a release valve for the terror and adrenaline of the past hour. "You crazy son of a bitch," Carlos said, punching Frank lightly on the shoulder. running headfirst into a horde of those things. 8 years in the pros and you still don't know when to stay on the bench. Frank grinned despite his exhaustion. Says the man who came running out to join me. When they finally pulled themselves to their feet and made their way into the main gym, Frank was surprised to find a buzz of organized activity. Anna had the smoothie bar up and running, blending protein shakes for the new arrivals. Betsy was tending to injuries, applying butterfly bandages to a cut on Jason's forehead. Dr. Milton was examining Mia's leg, his movements professional despite the tremor in his hands. All told, there were almost a dozen people in the gym now, the original group plus those Frank had rescued and a few others who had made it in on their own. They moved with purpose, transforming the fitness center into something resembling a fortress. Weight benches blocked the front windows. Someone wheeled the water cooler to a central location. The food from the restaurant was being organized on a table normally used for protein supplements and merchandise. "We've got enough to last a while," Carlos said, following Frank's gaze. "And the water's still running, electricity too, for now." Frank nodded, allowing himself a moment of hope. "Then we hold out. Wait for help." "If help is coming," Ryan muttered from nearby, his brief moment of courage apparently fading back into pessimism. Frank fixed him with a steady gaze. "It will. Until then, we take care of each other." "So, that's what we did," Frank said, his massive hands cradling the now empty tumbler. The overhead lights of Smitty's bar cast long shadows across his features, highlighting the lines etched by time and hardship. Smitty leaned against the bar, completely engrossed in the story. The other patrons had long since vacated, leaving just the two of them in the quiet sanctuary. "How long did you stay there?" Frank's eyes grew distant, revisiting memories no one should have to carry. "A few weeks, but honestly it felt a lot longer than that. Between the smoothie bar and the food we took from the Italian restaurant, we had enough to last. Carlos and I kept everyone in shape, figured being strong might mean the difference between life and death if we had to move again." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "We ran through every smoothie combination imaginable. Turns out protein powder and canned peaches isn't half bad. Pasta sauce and whey protein, though, that was a low point." "And the military eventually showed up?" Smitty prompted, leaning forward onto the bar. 16 days after day 0, they all kind of blended together after a while. "What happened to everyone, the people you saved?" "We're all still kicking. Carlos and I found a new gym about 2 miles from here. Bigger place, better equipment. Everybody else is scattered around Seattle, just living the best life that they can. It's about all we can hope for these days." "Ain't that the truth? You know, Smitty, you should come by the gym sometime," Frank offered, his natural friendliness reasserting itself. "I'll set you up with some free personal training. Get those bartender arms working more than just bottle openers." Smitty laughed, shaking his bald head. "I appreciate the offer, but I think I'm more suited to this side of the bar. Besides, someone's got to keep collecting these stories." Frank raised his glass in acknowledgement. "To the storytellers, then. You're doing important work, Smitty. People need to remember how it was out there." They shared a moment of companionable silence before Frank drained his glass and rose to his impressive height. "I should get going. Early session tomorrow." "Thanks for coming in," Smitty said, extending his hand, which disappeared entirely in Frank's massive grip. Frank nodded once more, then headed for the door, his large frame silhouetted briefly against the night before he disappeared into the darkness. Smitty waited until the door closed, then reached over to the bar for his voice recorder. He clicked it off, turning the small device over in his hand before carefully setting it aside underneath the bar, joining the collection of voices from the New World, a record of how humanity faced its darkest hour and, somehow, survived. The end.